Well, apologize for this being up late. It has been quite a week here at our house and at Fellowship Bible Chapel, which I'll explain in just a moment. I talk each week about the convergence of events that seem to indicate that we are living in the end times. Also that we live in a very disrupted world. And I saw this headline the other day in the San Francisco Chronicle, Surreal Sky, Surreal Year. And I thought I would sort of draw my title from that a little bit, just a little play on words, when the surreal is really the real. And I think this week was one of those times where everybody was, I think, thinking this in the back of their minds as we watched things unfold across the world and even for us locally. As I've indicated, we do put my updates up on Remnant Truth Network if you want to watch it there. There's also an app that you can download. But let me start off first to explain a little bit about what's going on at Fellowship Bible Chapel right now. You might have noticed first hour that Pastor Steve was not there, that Jim Wilson did a teaching. But I wish you would pray for Pastor Steve, his wife Supriya, and their daughter Malia. Pastor Steve was taken to the hospital the other night with some breathing problems. He did test positive for coronavirus, and he has pneumonia. He has had a few up and down days since he's been in the hospital. He has a rough recovery ahead of him. He's getting good treatment, medications, plasma treatments, and that sort of thing. But continue to pray for him. And his wife and daughter have had to isolate themselves, and it's a very difficult thing. I've talked to him on the phone. He has had some trouble. He has trouble. He's having breathing issues, obviously. But he was able to talk a little bit just for a couple minutes. But he desperately needs prayer, as does the family. It's a very difficult disease. You are in the hospital completely isolated from everyone else. So I wish that you would keep him in your prayers. In fact, let's open in a word of prayer right now. Father, we thank you for the promises of your word, and that you are the great physician. Pray that you'll heal Pastor Steve, bless his wife and daughter, that they will stay healthy, and that Steve will recover quickly and be back in the pulpit soon. Bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. So in addition to what happened to Pastor Steve early Wednesday morning, going to the hospital, we had a little bit of excitement here at our house. I don't know if I think I've posted this on Facebook. We bought a new house. We closed on July 10th, and literally within a minute of us closing, a big storm rolled through North Columbus. That damaged our roof. The roof has to be replaced. Fortunately, it's covered by insurance, but we had literally owned the house 1 or 2 minutes when the roof got damaged. And one of my neighbors is an insurance agent for the insurance company that I have my insurance with. He's not my agent, but we're sort of talking about the claim, and he goes, wow, you just bought the house and you have a claim right away. Are you sure you really need your roof replaced? And then Monday, I was coming home, this past Monday, Labor Day. I was out running some errands, and I was coming home a little bit after 5 o'clock, and the sky was really black, nasty, and it had that really weird glow that's not a good glow. If you've been around tornadoes before, you know that that's something that you don't really want to see. So we were getting, I had my weather app open. I was getting alerts that there was a tornado warning in our area. So I rushed home. I got home about 5:10. The tornado warning was to expire at 5:30, and the bad part of the storm, the bad cell, was coming right at our house and our neighborhood. So I told Pam we needed to get down in the basement. She was gathering something, and she said, and you could see, I don't know if it was a funnel cloud or a wind shear, went through the front yard and took out a small tree, split it in half essentially. We'll probably lose that. And then blew a bunch of things around, blew out a screen in the back. And my neighbor said he was finding sticks and pine cones all over his yard, even though there are no pine trees. There's pine trees in our yard, but there's nothing like that in his yard. And the roofing contractor came out to take another look at our roof and said that there are probably 6 to 8 homes on our street that are probably going to get their roofs replaced as a result of that storm. So it's been an interesting couple months since we moved into the new house. But we're surviving. And again, I would just urge you to keep Pastor Steve in your prayers. And I don't have time to mention them in my updates. I get an enormous number of prayer requests from friends. I try to share those usually on Facebook when I can. And there are just a lot of people that need prayer for health issues and that type of thing, including people who are getting this virus and having pretty serious issues with it. They need a lot of prayer, and their doctors need a lot of prayer because it is a very, it's a very strange disease. I guess it's the best way that I can say it. As I've read about it and watched other people have it, it's not something that you want. And there are people taking advantage of it. It is, I don't talk too much about it here because I'm finding a tremendous amount of what I would consider to be outright disinformation to not very well researched information coming out on both sides of the issue. And there's a question about the vaccine, and I'm not convinced that there's actually going to be a vaccine. But we'll see. They're doing trials. I know that a trial that's undergoing in the UK right now, they've restarted it even though they had a negative outcome, a negative event with regard to someone. But if you've done any work with pharmaceutical companies, you know that these negative outcomes are part and parcel of most medications that they put on the market these days. And it's so I don't know. I'm not convinced there'll be a vaccine, but we'll see, and we'll talk about it more once we know exactly what it is. I think there's quite a bit of speculation out there. And as again, I'm constantly researching the issue, and when I think I can add something to the conversation, I'll add something to the conversation. But certainly the rapid nature that they're coming out with this vaccine, these things usually take years to develop, and that they're going to come out with something where, a little over 6 months into this, 8 months into this, that's pretty troubling. Of course, Russia claims that they have a vaccine that'll work, and I think everybody should be pretty skeptical of those claims. But let's get into some of the events that happened this week. Let me give you a little introduction. We look at things. I think I've been accused in some cases of engaging in newspaper exegesis, but this is what happens with regard to prophecies that are made in the Bible. That the prophecies will unfold in a real world. They're not going to unfold in some unknown world. They're going to, if this is indeed the end times, and I really believe that this is, these events are going to take place in a real culture that exists, a real geopolitical world that exists, and so we will have to see how these prophecies play. I'm not sure that we're at the stage where these prophecies that we can say 100%, this is absolutely, positively the way that it's going to work out. I think we have some very good markers and guidelines, but the exact nature that they will work out is, I think, something that's still to be determined. Again, they will operate within certain parameters, obviously, but the exact nature of which I think it's worthy to discuss and speculate and see how they might work and see how they will work out. But I personally try not to be too dogmatic about exactly how they're going to work out, just because of the way the scripture is worded. Now, the prophets, the major and minor prophets, wrote during the kingdoms of Judah and Israel after the kingdom split after the death of Solomon. And that occurred about 931 BC. And there were prophets to the northern kingdom. There were prophets to the southern kingdom. There were some prophets who had a ministry related to one specific country or people group. For example, Obadiah prophesied to Edom. And I think a lot of the prophecies of Obadiah are still yet to be fulfilled. I personally lean towards the interpretation that the people who claim to be Palestinians today are the Edomites of Scripture that Obadiah was prophesying to. There's a lot of connection there. There's a lot of things that indicate that that might be the case. Now, I may be totally wrong on that. I'm just saying is based on the way I've studied it and what I see and some of the symbols that Obadiah talks about, like the eagle and that type of thing. And then you see that that eagle is the symbol of the Palestinian Authority of the Palestinian people. And they make claims similar to what the claims that are being made by the Edomites in the book of Obadiah. I think they're in very difficult circumstance. We know that Jonah, for example, also he went to Nineveh in the capital of Assyria, and prophesied. So he had a specific people that he directed to. Now, I'm going to share a little bit in just a moment, but I'm going to, one of the prophets that prophesied to the northern kingdom was the prophet Micah. He's a contemporary of Isaiah. I'm going to read a little bit of his scriptures in just a moment. But he prophesied in the period of time leading up to and after the fall of the northern kingdom to the Assyrian Empire. That took place in about 722 BC. And you can see some of this documented in, for example, we went to London a year and a half ago, and you can go to the London Museum and you can look at the cylinder, the cylinders that they have there that have the cuneiform writing on them that talk about Sennacherib and what he did with regard to the kingdom of Israel. Now, he didn't always tell the complete story, but it's actually there and documented. And then you can also see these great reliefs that they brought to the British Museum from Nineveh that tell the stories of Sennacherib and some of the other kings. And it was interesting, when we were there was a special exhibit. This would have been around November of 2017. There was November of 2018, November 2018. And they had this, one of the Assyrian kings, they called him, and I can't remember his name, but they referred to him as King of Assyria, King of the World. And it was very interesting language that they used to describe this King of Assyria, especially when we have this world leader that's coming. So there are a lot of things that we can learn. In fact, this is the way Bible prophecy works sometimes. When a prophet wrote, he wrote for his, and this is a general rule, he wrote for his time. He also wrote his prophecies would have applicability to the time of the first coming of Messiah, and they would have applicability to the time of the second coming of Messiah. But again, until we get right into the event, I don't know that we're going to know exactly. We're going to see the prophecies play out. And at some point, people will be able to say, this is that which was prophesied by the prophets. But I think it's a situation where we need to be very careful. And I do see some people running around now saying, Ezekiel 37 has been fulfilled. Well, if you read all of the prophecies of Ezekiel 37, you know that the end part, that they will know that I am the Lord, has not been fulfilled. So some of these prophecies, I think, are in process. But Daniel and Ezekiel, they wrote when they were in Babylon. After the fall of the kingdom of Judah to the Babylonians and the last siege and carrying away of people into captivity occurred in 586 BC. Daniel was probably taken in the first wave that occurred around 605 or 606 BC. And Daniel has some very interesting things that he wrote. And I've done a teaching on this. I think it's up on YouTube. It's called the Maskilim, the wise who will understand. Because there are these passages in Daniel that talk about in the end times, there are going to be people who will understand what is going on and being able to instruct each other. That's why I think people need to be in the Word. They need to be paying attention to what's going on. And hopefully they will be, I personally pray that I am one of those wise that will understand. In Daniel chapter 11, he starts building this theme up. The people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. So that's what's going to happen in the end times. There are going to be people that will have special understanding about the times in which they live. And in Scripture, there were always people who were looking at what was going on around them in terms and how that worked out in terms of their faith and beliefs. For example, we know there's this prophecy or this story about Jesus. They came to him, they said, well, when they asked him about the tower that fell and people got killed, what was the meaning of that? Or they came to him and they asked him questions about Herod and his relationship with his wife or his brother's wife. Because that would have been, obviously I don't think they had newspapers in those days, but that was what people were talking about. And the Pharisees and Sadducees who came and challenged Jesus, they would ask him questions about these things. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, he continues the theme, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Now I believe this is a description of the beginning of the time of Jacob's trouble. So when we see this passage here about Michael shall stand up, and there shall be, after he stands up, I believe that happens in the midst of this 70th week. I think it happens before the abomination of desolation. But Daniel continues then and says, and they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Now, a lot of times that's interpreted to mean we're going to have an explosion of knowledge. People are going to be traveling more. And I think that that's one of the acceptable interpretations of that passage, but I think it has a much deeper meaning, and that knowledge will be increased. And I actually think this is a reference to people will go to and fro, back and forth through the book, through Scripture, and knowledge shall be increased if they're in the Word. Again, Daniel chapter 12, verse 7 talks about it too. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times and half a times. That's a 3.5 year period. Time, 1 year, times 2 years, half a year. 1 plus 2 plus a half is 3.5 years. And when he shall have the accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all of these things shall be finished. And we see other prophecies that talk about this period of 3.5 years that will be the period of the maximum power of the Antichrist and what he will be doing to persecute the people of God during that period of time, including the nation of Israel. Verse 8 of Daniel chapter 12, and I heard, but I understood not, then said, O my Lord, when shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So that's sort of how the place that I come from. as I'm looking at a lot of things, in that I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I'm trying to share that information. But I also understand that until we're like right in it, we're not going to understand exactly. I use the example of the storm the other night. There was a tornado that had a path that, and it went by about 1.5 miles north of our house. But of course, we had some bad related weather. And until you're really right in that, I don't think you really understand exactly what's happening. You can see it coming, and then all of a sudden it just sort of blows through very quickly. And then you say, oh yeah, that was a tornado or a funnel cloud. So back to Micah wrote about things. And so if you understand that Micah wrote for his time, he wrote for the time of the first coming, but he also has things that are applicable to the world at the time of the second coming. Look at some of the things that he says. For example, in Micah chapter 2. First part of Micah chapter 2 says this: Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it is in the power of their hand. And they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, Behold, against this family do I devise an evil from which ye shall not remove your necks. Neither shall you go haughtily, for this time is evil. In Micah chapter 3, he also talks a little bit about what's going on with regard to the southern kingdom. Of course, the northern kingdom is going through this period of judgment by the Assyrian Empire. He says, And I said, Hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and you princes of the house of Israel. Is it not for you to know judgment, who hate the good and love the evil, who pluck off their skin from off them and their flesh from off their bones? Verse 4. Then shall they cry unto the Lord, but he will not hear them. He will even hide his face from them at that time. And as they have behaved themselves ill in their doings, thus saith the Lord, concerning the prophets that make my people err, that bite with their teeth and cry, Peace. And he that putteth not into their mouths, they even prepare war against him. Therefore night shall be unto you, that ye shall not have a vision, and it shall be dark unto you, that ye shall not divine. And the sun shall go down over the prophets, and the day shall be dark over them. Then shall the seers be ashamed, and the diviners confounded. Yea, they shall all cover their lips, for there is no answer of God. But truly I am full of power by the Spirit of the Lord, and of judgment, and of might, to declare unto Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin. Hear this, I pray you, you heads of the house of Jacob, and princes of the house of Israel, that abhor judgment and pervert all equity. They build up Zion with blood, and Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, and the priests thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. Does that sound like anything that's going on in the world today and in the church today? Yet they will lean upon the Lord and say, Is not the Lord among us? None evil can come upon us. In other words, they think they're okay, but they're not. So these prophets have a lot of applicability to our time. In Corinthians, Paul says that everything that happened to Israel happened as examples for us, so that we wouldn't make the same mistakes that they make. And it appears when you look around the church today, you see a lot of people claiming to be part of the church, making the same errors that were made, that the prophets addressed before the fall of Israel and the kingdom of Israel, and before the fall of Judah. So just keep these in mind. And as we go through these things, we will look at things that are going on. And I clearly think, I just think we're seeing things that are of a completely different character than we have seen before. There's always been false teaching. There's always been apostasy. There's always been falling away from the faith. But it just seems to me to be that this is at a much greater level than it was before. So let's look at a few things that are going on. I'm going to look at a few cultural things, some things going on in the physical world, and then we'll take a look at some of the things going on in the Middle East and wrap this up. And this one may, I don't know, this one may be a little bit shorter than usual just because it was a rough week to prepare with everything that was going on around here. So here's this Netflix video that was released this week called Cuties. This is an article from the New Yorker. Now you can tell their orientation. Now, this is an article about exploited young girls, mainly in France, from immigrant communities, and how they're exploited sexually and otherwise. I have not watched the video. I have seen a few still images from the video, and the way that these young girls are sexualized is rather shocking. No decent human being should countenance the way these young girls, little girls, are portrayed. Now, what the New Yorker does is they take this and they say, "Cuties, the extraordinary Netflix debut that became the target of a right-wing campaign." Now, what this writer of this article says is, well, look, they were trying to speak against the exploitation of these young girls, mainly girls. I think the focus is on girls in the video. This is what I've read. As I said, I've not seen it. I have no intention of seeing it. All the pictures I've seen are young girls. Well, so he says, well, see, they're doing good with this, but the question is, do they need to continue to sexually exploit the young girls and put them up in this inappropriate manner to say, hey, this is not something that we should do? So it seems to be that it's the wrong way to approach it at a minimum, and it really is. It's really troubling, though, that Netflix did this. Now, there's a lot of people that are against this. A lot of people canceling their Netflix accounts because of this. But to a lot of people in the world, this is just, well, he was trying to do something good with the film, so let's just let it go. But my problem is it kind of continues and exacerbates the exploitation. When we talk about evil leaders and people doing things for bribes and that type of thing, like Micah was talking about, this report came out, and as an attorney, a trial lawyer who's run up against some of the people on the Mueller team in my career, and not in it wasn't a warm, fuzzy relationship. Let's just put it that way. Here's this thing that comes out. At least 27 phones from special counsel's, that's Mueller's office, were wiped before the Department of Justice Inspector General could review them. Now, I will tell you that in today's litigation environment, this is an egregious offense, that somebody destroys electronic evidence. There are seminars that I've done seminars about how you have to preserve electronic evidence when you're involved in a matter like this, particularly when you're involved as a government prosecutor, a government investigator. And that 27 phones from the Mueller team have been wiped is just absolutely shocking. It is criminal. But now, will anything be done with it? There have been other high-level politicians that have destroyed emails and not preserved emails like they were, used private devices in an attempt to get around it. And so the question is anything going to happen to these guys? And the answer is, I really don't know. Listen, look at what this one person tweeted, Ivan Pinchakov. At least 27 phones used by the Mueller team were wiped before they could be checked for records. Some phones just wiped themselves. In other words, there was mass password amnesia that required reset. So if you have an iPhone, for example, if you enter your password wrong, I don't know if it's 5 or 10 times, then the phone will be wiped. So amazingly, these bright, intelligent lawyers that had graduated into the top of their law school classes that will go on to these very high-paying jobs at major firms in Washington, D.C. and New York and other big cities, they can't remember the password to their to their iPhone. This does not seem to be probable, especially since the password may be, as some people use, password or ABCD or something like that. One of the people that did this, Andrew Weissman, a top prosecutor on Mueller's team, accidentally wiped his cell phone, causing the data to be lost. Other members of the team also accidentally wiped their phones, the DOJ said. These were not accidents. These were done intentionally, and they ought to be held accountable for what they did. On one prosecutor's phone, the report about what happened said it, quote, wiped itself without intervention from the prosecutor, the investigator. Well, that's kind of almost the miraculous. So, but this is the state of leadership. This is sort of a microcosm, a small example of what really goes on a much bigger scale, I feel. We have a lot of corrupt people involved in our government. We get the leaders we deserve. And unfortunately, we're getting ones that are worse and worse. Now, this is a video of an incident that took place in Compton, California overnight. You can see, I'll play here, a young guy walks up to a sheriff's deputy car and shoots the two deputies. They are in critical condition. They're being treated, and there are many, you can go out and you can, they've not caught the person, at least as of the time that I do this. The deputies are in critical condition. They were shot multiple times. They're fighting for their lives. And what immediately happened was a group of activists showed up at the hospital where they're being held. They acted like they wanted to go to see them. But as they were walking up, you can watch the videos, but I will give you language warnings. There was a lot of cussing and swearing, and they just, for example, when they approached the sheriff deputies who were providing security at the hospital, since the shooter is at large, they came out and they just said, "Hey, we're here to see the pigs that you got in there." And they're actually out there blocking the emergency room access and saying things like, "We hope they die. We hope they die." This is Compton, California, in today's world. It might explain why the report that I read yesterday was that more people left California this year than came in for the first time in a very, very long time. And I know people who've left. I have a lot of good friends who are still there, but some people have just said, "I have a family to protect and I'm going to get out of here." Well, the title was taken from this cover of the San Francisco Chronicle, "Surreal Sky, Surreal Year." And it certainly has been, 2020 has been a year that I think even those of us who believe we're in the end times and know that these things will accelerate, I think that what's happened with 2020 has far exceeded our expectations or what we surmised was going to happen. So here's a picture. This is noon along the Embarcadero the other day in San Francisco because of the massive fires that are raging across California. I believe in California, there have been, I think 5,000 square miles of California has burned in the past 10 days. Some of these fires have been in the top 5 or the largest fires ever in the history of California, which has a history of fires. It's just the nature of the environment there. Here's a little video of the El Dorado fire that's, I think, still raging near Yucaipa, California. That's near San Bernardino, north of the 10 freeway, between San Bernardino and Palm Springs. But this picture is repeated. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of these fires all over the West. They're in California. There's some in Colorado. I was reading about one in Colorado, which early in the week, Colorado had temperatures of around 92 to 100, and then it snowed the next day. Pretty dramatic change in the weather, but the snow was probably not going to affect the fire. They said that some of the fires they did not expect to contain until sometime late in 2020 or early 2021. So process that. That means that this is going to continue. And the word that's continually used is unprecedented. This is a report out of Oregon. I have friends in Salem, Oregon, and Portland, and they're saying that it's hard to breathe. The air quality is horrible. In San Francisco itself, they had temperatures. I believe the temperature in San Francisco the record had been 92, and the temperature hit 100 this week. That's very unusual for San Francisco because the ocean is so cold there. It keeps it cool. Most people don't have air conditioning. I was in San Francisco once when it hit 92 degrees at Fisherman's Wharf. Caused massive amounts of fog to roll in till it cooled the air temperature down. Then the fog rolled out. Then it warmed up again and the fog rolled in. And did this like 4 times during the day. But people don't have air conditioning there. And with the fires that are going on and the smoke generated from the fires, people are having to stay in homes where it's warm, extra warm, no air conditioning, and bad air quality. And the whole situation is just, again, the word that's everybody's using is unprecedented. We've never seen this happen before. It's unprecedented. Here's reports from USA Today had this headline on yesterday. Wildfires race across West, people in 6 states under evacuation orders, mass fatalities expected. That headline was also repeated in yesterday's New York Times. Blazes untamed. Officials prepare for mass deaths. In the fires in Oregon, there are dozens of people missing. There are scenes like this in neighborhoods outside of Salem, Oregon. I believe this is in Oregon. Bears Lake or something, I think is the name of the neighborhood. The homes are destroyed. They're looking for people. They're looking for bodies. And you see these kind of weird things that happen with, the houses are destroyed. And I always prefer the simple explanation. Houses are made of dry wood. Dry wood is much more combustible. Early in my career, I used to investigate fires and explosions and handle litigation and insurance claims over that. So I understand a little bit how this works. And you would always have these fires and you would investigate it, and there would always be something. It was like, why is that still standing? Why did the fire not burn that? And so here you see flowers, you'll see trees with leaves on them. And the simple explanation usually is this. Dry wood burns, wet wood doesn't. So I think most people know that when you go to start a fire in your backyard, you don't use wet wood, you use dry wood. Well, wood in homes has been dried out sometimes for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years. It's very, very dry. And so the trees, though, with green leaves, are full of water, and they're much less likely to burn. That's why you see sometimes vegetation surviving these things. And these weather events are always hard to understand. I remember I saw a funnel cloud skipping up Lakeshore Drive in Chicago once. We actually got under an underpass to avoid the funnel cloud. And then we drove down Lakeshore Drive, and there was these giant oak trees had been ripped out of the ground and laid on their sides by the funnel clouds, but the vast majority of the leaves were still on the tree. It was something that was inexplicable. It's just the way it happens sometimes. So these fires were unprecedented. This is what the Washington Post reported this morning in an article, that the smoke plumes that they're seeing are unlike anything that's ever seen. The other thing I noticed during looking at the news this week is it seems that fire this week was sort of the overarching theme. For example, on the island of Lesbos in Greece, the largest migrant camp of the immigrants that came from mainly Syria and other parts of the Middle East, burned this week. And now those people are homeless. They don't know how they're going to get them housed in the short term. And this is during a coronavirus, spreading of the coronavirus in the close quarters there. It's already a problem. So this is just, again, these things that we see, it just seems like this week it was just like as soon as you would start to wrap your head around one event, here comes another event. And I think this is the way it's going to be until the Lord returns. That I don't think it's going to calm down at this point. I'm looking at things that I'm reading about the upcoming elections in the United States. The next 50 days leading up to the election and the 50 days after the election are going to be a pretty rough time here in the United States. I expect riots. I expect questionable election results. I don't think people are going to accept them, and I just think we're going to have major problems. So we have major problems in the U.S. We have them in the physical world, and things are going to continue to happen that way. We're going to have them in the in the political world, and then we're going to have them in geopolitics. So let's take a look at the Middle East. I've got a couple things to look at here that I think are important. I'm only going to sort of what I would say scratch the surface today. This is this is a time that I would only describe as unprecedented. So one of the things that is happening this week is we continue to have issues with what's going on in Lebanon. This is an interesting, the national newspaper from the United Arab Emirates. It's oriented towards the United Arab Emirates, but I find it to be interesting. They had this editorial that Lebanon's trying to get over all the little hurdles and doing the cabinet formation and getting the country back on track because the government disbanded after the explosion in early August. And the U.S. has sanctions, which is a brick wall they're going to get over all these hurdles, and then they're going to hit the wall anyway with the U.S. sanctions. I think it's a very interesting editorial that explains what's going on. Now, I know a lot of you don't like the New York Times. The New York Times this week had a very good investigative article about the things that happened at the port of Beirut a little over a month ago, where the explosion occurred. And they good graphics. They showed the ammonium nitrate. They showed some other things that were going on at the time. You'll see here in a moment they show how the fire started, and then they show all the people that live. 100,000 people live within a mile of this warehouse. They show the fire starting. They show what appear to be, you see little like firecrackers and that type of thing, would appear to be fireworks going off. Of course, it's stored next to this stuff that will really enhance any explosion. There's an initial explosion, and then shortly after that explosion, then there is this massive explosion that some people are saying was ammonium nitrate. I know there are a lot of different theories about what happened. Certainly it's clear, even the New York Times talks about this, is that the corruption that was endemic with regard to the report, or to the port there, just allowed this situation to fester, this stuff to be stored there that shouldn't have been stored there. And the port in this area was clearly controlled by Hezbollah. So it's caused the government in Lebanon to fail. People are having really difficult problems getting back to work. And then as they were doing some repairs, they caught one of the warehouses that's like right next to this warehouse was caught on fire. Very, very bad situation there in Lebanon. And here's the New York Times article on the explosion and their analysis of it. I thought it was pretty well done. Now, so Lebanon is a major problem, and it is on the northern border of Israel. It's ripe for the taking. Hezbollah effectively controls the government there. They're trying to recreate the government. It's possible they're going to bring back Hariri as prime minister. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. The whole situation is a mess, and Lebanon has become an incredibly corrupt country. Now, I'm going to step back about 2 weeks ago. There was a video that was released by the Ministry of Communications, And it's a very interesting video. I'm going to play you some clips of it. This article at Orthodox Times talks about the fact that it describes it. Now, of course, Orthodox Times is related to Greek Orthodox Church that would have been in charge of the Hagia Sophia. It originally had the Hagia Sophia that was converted to a mosque about almost 100 years ago. Converted to a museum about 100 years ago, and which had been a mosque before that for probably over 400 years. When the Ottomans took control of Istanbul, Hagia Sophia Church was converted into a mosque. Ataturk in the 1920s converted it to a museum. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, has now converted it back to a mosque. And we've played all the videos and things of that, and him going there and reciting the Quran. But this event in the historical rise of the Ottoman Empire, coupled with Erdogan's desire to be the new sultan of a revived Ottoman Empire, is being used constantly in the Turkish media. It's used in Erdogan's speeches, and it's used by this. This was as the Orthodox Times described it, a new propaganda video has been released by the Turkish government, which demonstrates the neo-Ottoman desires of President Erdogan, who imagines himself a caliph. And in the video, it's very interesting. So here's another blurb. This is from one of Erdogan's social media accounts talking about it. And what he says here, essentially, he says, "By Allah's leave, we will never turn from the path of service to the country and the nation." And if you watch Turkey, and I do watch Turkey, have been for years, one of the things you know is that when things are going bad for Erdogan, the propaganda really flows. And are things going bad for Erdogan in Turkey? This report in yesterday's, or this week's, one of the papers this week, The National from the United Arab Emirates, Turkey's rating cut by Moody's as risk increase, and the bonds that Turkey uses to raise money to do their projects, and Erdogan's done some massive projects, dams, infrastructure, bridge over the Bosporus. The airport in Istanbul is now, I believe, officially the largest airport in the world. He wants to use it as a major transit point between Europe and the West and Asia, because they're kind of right there in the middle, they're right there in that bridge between Asia and Europe. So they cost a lot of money, but their bonds have been downgraded to where they're five grades below investment grade. So this is going to increase the cost of borrowing and that type of thing. So the director of communication tweeted out this video that celebrated one of the early Ottoman rulers who was taking over the country. And I want you to see as you go through this, if you translate this, this is what he said. "For us, the red apple is a great and powerful Turkey. It is the blessed march of our nation, which has written legends from Manzikert to July 15th. Now, 2016, July 15th, 2016 was when they tried. There was an attempted coup of Erdogan, and a lot of people think he staged it. But nevertheless, there was an attempted coup. There were a lot of people killed. And since then, Erdogan has completely gutted the military. He's gutted all sorts of institutions and put his people in place. Now, this has caused Turkey some problems because the well-trained, capable military leaders have been put in prison and purged. So that's why you see sort of a close relationship between Erdogan and Putin, because Erdogan needs some of the firepower that Putin has to help to himself stay in power. But Erdogan's a master at playing things off against another. And I'm not saying that Erdogan is the Antichrist or anything like that, but I'm saying he is definitely an Antichrist with the way he operates. And so when he needs help, he does all of these things. And so listen to this. So this is what the director of the Ministry of Communications says. For us, the red apple is a great and powerful turkey. It is the blessed march of our nation, which has written legends from Manzikert to July 15. The red apple is the great sycamore tree in the shade of which many oppressed peoples cool themselves. It is what all people from Gibraltar to the Hejaz, from the Balkans to Asia await wishfully. In other words, everybody would like to be under the boughs of the great cooling of the red apple. And Erdogan is the one who's going to lead us to the restoration of the Turkish Empire. And so they released this video. Now, in his tweet, he mentions Hejaz. Hejaz is the area in Saudi Arabia of Mecca and Medina. And Erdogan is an Islamist. He is a Muslim Brotherhood guy. And he would love to be the guy to take back for the Turkish Ottoman Empire, a revived empire, the holy places of Mecca and Medina. And you'll see what he does in this video. So here's this video. And I want you to just watch the symbol. They have the old people, but then they will see how they kind of mix in the old people that are conquering Turkey, the Ottomans, to the modern Turkish army. And then you'll see them that they sort of bring this stuff in. They bring Erdogan into this. So they have these, so some of the lyrics of this thing are, the goal of the red apple will be reached only with the lives lost on the way. The promised divine light and truth will certainly dominate forever. These are the lyrics that are in the song, that I'm not playing the Turkish music. Only with the conquest of the red apple will the world find tranquility and peace. We are coming, O glorious red flag, that's the Turkish flag, the love of every corner and township of the homeland. May the sounds of Allah Akbar rise to the ninth heaven. Shielding is the Turks' military life, the honor and dignity of our heroic land. May the sound of Allah Akbar rise to the ninth heaven. Allah, Allah, we will not turn back. Strikes of the tyrant wails, that may the seven worlds hear our sound of freedom. My glorious Turkey, we are connected at the heart to the red flag and the dear homeland. Those crazy Turks, for the sake of the crescent, will give their heads anywhere in the world. Come, my Turkey, for the love of Allah, put another stamp on history, O great nation. On behalf of the homeland, you've come to inspire again. And so you see this, they have this imagery of the great Ottoman conqueror. Then they turn it to the modern Turkey military. Then they go back to the ancient. You see this ancient holding the missile. The children are on board. This is a clear propaganda video. Then they have the Turkish soldiers. Then they have the ancient conqueror. Then they have the aircraft. And all the time there's this music playing in the background about, how great the revival of Turkey will be when it controls the nations like it's destined to do. This is what Erdogan believes. This is what he pushes for. Now here you see the Ottoman conqueror entering Hagia Sophia when Hagia Sophia was taken back. And you see this Islamic Ottoman ruler taking over this great temple. And again, the military scenes. Pretty slick video, and the way they sort of integrate, it's clear propaganda as to what they're trying to do. And then you'll see even just a little bit more. Now they tie in Erdogan and what he's doing now to take over the gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. And then you'll see this one. This one's probably even more overt. This is the welcoming of the great leader at Hagia Sophia. When he conquered it and turned it into a mosque. And now they intersperse, here comes Erdogan. He's doing the same thing. He has restored Islamic control over the great structure there, Hagia Sophia. And you see the complete connection. And then you hear again. And then this is sort of like the ultimate thing that they want. This is what Erdogan really wants. This is, of course, he's already said he wants the main Islamic holy sites in Mecca and Medina, and he wants the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And he's pushing for this. Now, the rise of Turkey and Iran's saying this week that they have new missiles that give them even more capability to attack Israel. There's also reports that they're much closer to developing a nuclear weapon. If they don't have one already, they're shortening the time in which they can develop a nuclear weapon despite sanctions and all of this sort of thing. And so there is this, Russia is helping both Turkey and Iran. This week, the Arab League came out and they rebuked Turkey and Iran. They said, what you are doing is just not good. And so it's because the Persian Gulf Arab states and Egypt and Jordan are concerned about what will happen if Turkey and Iran come. And you see there's even, I saw a newspaper article this week about the cooperation that's going on now between Turkey and Iran. Now, everybody would say, well, they're Sunni and Shia. They would never get along. Well, that's not true. They will work together to defeat their common enemy, and then they'll deal with each other. But you see this uniting of Turkey and Iran. And in response to that now, the Gulf states are entering into agreements with Israel. So we saw a couple weeks ago, United Arab Emirates into agreement. They're going to have a signing ceremony. I think it's still scheduled for this week at the White House. And now Bahrain is going to join in. Bahrain has also agreed. And that's kind of a significant thing. So here's Israel Hayom's newspaper, I think this is this morning or Friday, praising the great agreement between Israel and Bahrain that's been brokered by Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. The Palestinians are upset. They've condemned the Bahrainian deal. They have withdrawn their envoy. The Arab League met in the last couple of days, and the Palestinian foreign minister, essentially he said, listen, you have shot us in the heart. You have shot us in the heart. You cannot believe this. And so what's happening is the Palestinians are being very marginalized by everything that's going on. It is kind of I guess I would call it a rather significant development. Now, Caroline Glick picks up a little bit on this theme. We're going to just look at two articles, and then I'm going to be pretty much done. But she has an article in Israel Hayom. It's called The UAE and the Democratic Care Partnership, nestled between Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the Council on American and Islamic Relations, or CARE, a group with deep ties to the Democratic Party. And it's pretty clear. I would highly recommend you can go to Israel Hayom, you can go to carolineglick.com and find this article. She references Andy McCartney, who tried the Blind Sheik for the first attack on the World Trade Center back during the Clinton administration. And it's clear that there are very significant ties between CARE, the Muslim Brotherhood, and people in the Democratic Party. And in fact, we're electing some of these people, like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib from Detroit. We're electing these Muslim radicals they're being elected to Democratic seats in Congress. So Caroline says this, people wanted to develop outreach with Muslim Americans like Clinton administration and George W. Bush administration. They develop outreach with Muslim Americans, and CARE was the beneficiary of that outreach. But in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, the Bush administration gradually began changing its position. In 2008, following the Holy Land Foundation trial, the FBI cut off its ties with CARE. Barack Obama reversed course. From the outset of his presidency, Obama shifted U.S. foreign policy towards Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. At his June 4, 2009 speech at the University of Cairo, where he called for a reordering of U.S. ties with the Islamic world, Obama courted the Muslim Brotherhood, ignoring Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak's explicit request. Obama invited representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood to attend his speech. Very good article, and it shows that there are clear ties. She says this: Biden's top campaign advisors held a conference call with Muslim activists to apologize for some of the things that were said by the Biden campaign. Biden's top foreign policy advisor apologized profusely and pledged that a Biden administration will be genuinely inclusive to ensure Arab and Muslim representation at the decision-making level. Given CARE's power in the Democratic base, it is hard to imagine Biden long maintaining his anti-BDS position in any meaningful way. It is also hard to imagine a Biden administration building on the Israel-UAE alliance, now the Israel-UAE-Bahrain alliance, to strengthen America's allies in the Middle East. Very excellent article by Carol. And the other article I would highly recommend is on the front page of today's Jerusalem Post, written by Seth Frantzman, who analyzes, the eyes are now on, okay, who's going to join in on this? What's the next Arab country that's going to join in on normalizing ties with Israel? Everybody's hoping, at least in the Trump administration and others, that it's going to be Saudi Arabia. It's pretty clear when you analyze things that the Saudis are probably in control. They're very influential over what goes on in Bahrain. Bahrain is the sheikh that governs Bahrain is a Sunni Muslim. The population of Bahrain is very high percentage, way above 50%, is Shiite Islam. So there's some tension there. And so the Saudis give cover to the Sunni leader there. So the Saudis want a Sunni leader in place. Says this in his article: Saudi Arabia is like the quiet calculating giant that has given its support for the UAE and Bahrain to move forward with Israel. So a lot of this is going on in the background. Still the official position of the Saudi government through the king is, listen, we're going to maintain this. We want a Palestinian state. That's got to be part of this. Jared Kushner came out in interviews today and said what he's doing is designed to result in a Palestinian state. This is the plan. Now, I know that Palestinians may never accept it, but the point is that everybody is still pushing for a two-state solution. That is a fact. That is the policy of the United States government under the Trump administration. I don't care for that. I don't think that that is a wise thing to be doing. And I think, listen, I know people don't agree with Bill Koenig and what he concludes. Bill's a very good friend of mine. We've been texting back and forth about this. Our concerns about dividing the land, trying to divide the land, whether it's going to be accomplished or not under your administration, I think it is not a thing to be doing. And ever since that plan came out in late January, would you agree that things have not gone real well in the United States? Millions of people unemployed, problems with the virus, geopolitical problems. Now we have all the protests. We have fires, unprecedented fires ravaging the West Coast. And it seems like every time we push these proposals, I don't care which administration it is, things like this happen. Is it connected? I think it is, and I'm troubled by it. So Seth has a very good article, and then he talks about how the Gulf Coast countries, what they want is they want a bulwark against Iran. And now Turkey. Turkey's causing the same problem. Even one of the Iraqi politicians came out this week and said it's time for Iraq to normalize relations. Saudi Arabia is now allowing flights. I just saw a tweet this morning that Morocco may have start allowing overflights by Israeli aircraft. These things are unprecedented. They have not happened before. And while they're good and they do have this building up of economic benefits to Israel, I'm concerned where they end up ultimately. And I will go back, I cited Psalm 83 last week, that there's a crafty alliance that comes up against Israel. And I think what Psalm 83 describes is a perpetual condition. So I'm not very trusting of what's going on. Saudi Arabia is very much wanting to have this done. You have Qatar, which is a big supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, always wanted. Qatar is I think a population of 700,000 or 800,000 people. I think everybody in Qatar, because of the oil and gas wealth, gets at least $1 million a year into their account. They hire people. They are very tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. They're very tied to Hamas in funding Hamas. When Israel wants to calm Hamas down, they usually work through Qatar. Qatar has a massive gas field that it shares with Iran in the Persian Gulf. While we can all want peace, we have to understand that there are consequences to this as to how this is going to play out. And I'm concerned about how it plays out in the long term from a Bible prophecy standpoint. Sure, in the short term, it's going to be questioned. So now the question is, when are the Saudis going to come on board? Here's what Seth says. The question for Riyadh is when it thinks normalization could come. Could it come before the U.S. election and gamble on Trump succeeding, or does it prefer to wait and see? Another issue it must weigh, Saudi Arabia must weigh, is whether it wants to be seen as going back on its word about needing to see progress on Israel-Palestinian peace processes. Reports in the region suggest that while the U.S. has pushed for Saudi normalization, the kingdom must weigh its key personal relationship with the Trump administration against its long-term image, interests, and pragmatism. And then Seth says this: that's not to say that an October surprise might not be in the making, since the last 2 months have seen two key peace deals. With a lockdown looming in Israel and the government not appearing, they're going to be locked down over the high holy days, at least that long, because of the virus spreading. The government not appearing to want to make concessions to a Palestinian leadership that is divided, aging, and won't even speak with Israel or the White House. It's unclear how this state of Israel, its Jewish and democratic character around which the country can agree despite differences on a myriad of other issues. So this is a problem that Israel has. I highly recommend that you rent that. I might remind you that back in April, I think it was April 28th of 2019, I did an update, and I talked then, came out of oilprice.com. Now remember, this is long before we had this coronavirus thing. It was long before we had these normalization deals. And it talked about the fact that a new Middle East mega war is unfolding right before our eyes. And it talked about what the Trump administration was trying to do was to try to create, and you see them still trying to do this. They started this back early in the administration. It was reported in oilprice.com in April of 2019, is to create an Arab, I think the term they used was Arab NATO. In fact, that I think there was a place in here in the articles that I cited was that that was one of the things that the Trump administration was trying to do. And this was in light of what was going on with the big meetings that were taking place between Russia, Iran, and Turkey about what to do with Syria. So listen, this is, well, here's what it said. in the article. Iran is leading a new bloc with Turkey and Qatar intent on remaking the greater Middle East. The Iranian leadership recognizes that this drive might lead to regional war and is actively preparing for such an eventuality. Hence, the overall dynamic affects all the countries of the region and all the great powers with interest there. A new bottom-up, decentralized reality is emerging on its own, and the main powers involved in the region are determined to exploit the dynamic in order to better control the post-crisis greater Middle East. At the core of the anticipated escalation and possible war is the race between Iran and Turkey for preeminence in the area of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, as well as the dismemberment and collapse of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. It is logical to assume that a clash with Israel would inevitably ensue, for Israel is expected to strenuously resist the collapse of the regional order, which would be to its detriment. So it goes on to talk about the fact that what the Trump administration, and I think with the approval of Israel, was trying to do was to establish an Arab NATO. And this was done, I mean, when you see the things, I think this was another, this was from Ayatollah Khamenei's website, the second phase of the Islamic Revolution. This was all part and parcel of this, and now we have the agreement between Iran and China where they're getting billions of dollars and getting funding, and they're selling their oil and that sort of thing. Listen, the world is very volatile. A lot of this is centered in the Middle East, and it's a very dynamic thing. We know how this will all eventually end up. We don't know exactly the steps that are going to take place until that happens, but we see the alliance between Turkey, Iran, and Russia. We see the counterweight to that. This, at least what the Trump administration is trying to do, is to create this Arab NATO. Look, this has been in place. This is what I was talking about back in April of 2019. It's very interesting. So listen, the world is very volatile. As I said at the beginning, I heard a lot of people this week say it is surreal. And I would say that it may seem surreal, but it's really the real thing that is going on. And this is the world that we live in. I think it's lining up very well with Bible prophecy. So we'll talk more about that this week. Again, I would ask that you continue to pray for Pastor Steve and his recovery and his family as they're dealing with some pretty serious issues. As I said, he was doing much better this morning. I think it's, as most of you know who've had to recover from things, the evenings are a little bit rougher than the mornings. So he was up this morning. So it's going to be that way for a little while, but pray that God will heal him completely and he'll be back in the pulpit. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you will bless us this week. Give us opportunities to share the gospel. Pray for Pastor Steve, that you will heal him quickly, completely, and restore him to the great teaching and preaching that he does. Watch over us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.